Hi, everybody. Welcome to TIA Now. I'm Clarence Reynolds. Working to redefine the network is the goal of a true digital transformation, and there are many pieces of the transformation puzzle that need to be in place. Joining us to discuss the next steps in digital infrastructure is G. Rittenhouse, Senior Vice President of Engineering for Cisco's Security Business Group, and Amal Podki, Managing Director, Global Network Strategy at Accenture. Welcome to you both.
Thank you,
Thank
Clarence.
you.
I want to start with you, G. As an ecosystem partner, how is Cisco helping its customers redefine its networks as part of an overall digital transformation?
So, of course, from a security perspective, everything starts at the network because the network we see as a single source of truth. You can always spoof a printer or whatever, but if the printer is talking to a Tor node, it's not behaving like a printer. So, the first key thing that we've done on all of our networking gear is to provide that visibility to the enterprise or to the managed security service provider. And so now you can see that flow, and from that flow be able to decide whether something is secure or needs further processing. In addition to that, we've just recently announced a set of switches with the capability to determine that even through encrypted traffic. So by looking at the traffic pattern and behavior, we're able to infer whether it's malicious or not. So we continue to drive down this visual behavior inside the network on the security appliances as well as the networking appliances to ensure that our customers have that security and that connectivity as the foundation.
And Amal, investment in a digital infrastructure is a really big step for a lot of companies. What industries are expressing the most hesitation?
I think, Clarence, across the board, what we see when we work with our clients is in terms of cash and the capex that is needed to drive some of these transformations. Of course, this is something that they are still looking at in terms of how they could generate that incremental investments that they need. So what we work with them is to try and identify what are the legacy equipment, infrastructure, services that could be run a lot more efficiently. And so doing that frees up a lot of the capital that is needed to drive some of those investments. Because to us, that is a very big, let's say, inhibitor from them accelerating the transformation.
And G, there's so much unknown when you are going through a network transformation. Are there examples that you could speak of that of a company that started to move toward network transformation and how it impacted their business?
Yeah, so actually there's several, but the most common is taking workloads from the premises and moving them into the cloud. And that changes the entire perimeter of the enterprise. And so doing that, what tends to happen is early on in that cycle, let's move everything to the cloud. And then all of a sudden on retrospective and further evaluation, you pull back, maybe put your compute there, your data is on-prem. And so as customers are going through this transformation, they're becoming more sophisticated. It's not just either or, it's much more refined. And so as the maturity of the customer continues to grow, that's where you see this kind of refinement taking place.
And I think the journey to cloud as a whole is a very interesting area that when we look at, because that's a real example of how our clients are trying to move towards transformation. And then, of course, they're trying to calibrate themselves in terms of the levels of readiness that they themselves are in to make the full journey to that cloud. And in many cases, they've had to live with a few trade-offs depending on how early or late they are in that cycle. But as G said, that's sort of the first concrete case where you're seeing that impacting their business in a very real way.
You're also starting to see it more structured. So in the early adoption of cloud, it was actually developers with their own credit cards perhaps, or lines of business going out there because they could develop the product more quickly. But as that becomes now a matter of practice for the business, this shadow IT or behind the scenes kind of cloud usage is being much more regulated. The security posture is being embedded. The policies are being embedded. And so you see this maturity of that adoption. And then, of course, furthering that digital transformation would be IoT. And you see the same kind of steps occurring as these industries evolve to the complete digital transformation.
Any conversation about virtualization has to mention security in some way. And G, specifically for you, how is Cisco's endpoint security solutions for MSSPs, and how will they impact operational efficiencies?
So, of course, particularly in this digital age with encryption and everything, the endpoint and the server are two key elements of the equation. What we've done in the past is protect the endpoints around malware and threats, and now even further around posturing and things. But it was very enterprise focused, where the enterprise could look at the devices, look at its the prominence of a particular file or whatnot in the context of their own enterprise, and then decide whether it's a threat, remove it, etc. Classic kind of behavior. From an MSSP perspective, though, you want to do this on behalf of the enterprise. So you're serving many enterprises as customers, which then also have their own endpoints. And so it's not enough to just have a single pane of glass for the endpoints, but you want to take that step back and now have a single pane of glass for the entire enterprise and many of them. So it's more on the management side, where you have multi-tenancy, multi-instance, different ways of doing posture, and then presenting those in clear reporting structures and whatnot back to the enterprise itself.
Absolutely. I think from enterprise perspective, there is this whole notion of what used to be secure in the previous decades is not secure anymore, because there is so much of traditional infrastructure that's moving to the cloud. And as more and more becomes software centric, obviously there is a lot more potential for attacks and targeted attacks. So this is why, as G said, a lot of this endpoint security is extremely critical, not just on the enterprise side, but also it is shaping the portfolio of the service providers who are offering those solutions back into the enterprises. So it's sort of impacting all of that value chain.
And just building on that, now that not just the cloud, but because the endpoint, people are doing work outside the firewall, cafes, etc., going to their SaaS applications, they can get infected and then bring that back behind the firewall and infect others. So the whole kind of notion of having a rigid perimeter defense is now being lost with the mobile user. And then, from that endpoint perspective, infecting others and other critical systems. So you now have to be able to look and remediate threats inside as well as outside.
And I know that Cisco has invested in mass automation to support IoT. How is that system going to deal with the large amounts of data that will be produced?
Well, today, because of the prevalence of Cisco gear, we see over 20 billion threats events per day and 20 million unique pieces of malware. So the numbers, quite frankly, are staggering. IoT will have influenced that and increase it, but quite frankly, you're already at such a scale that everything that we do is based on machine learning and algorithms and automation. And in fact, it's not just automating the threat detection, but automating the response. If your endpoint gets infected, if you have to manually take the file, put it into a sandbox, detonate it, then manually start provisioning your firewalls or proxies, that takes too long. Malware can spread inside of an enterprise within minutes. So we've had to automate this loop, and of course be very, very mindful of the presence of false positives. Do it in a way that doesn't disrupt the business. And that's one of the other key areas in terms of data evaluation and automation.
And I mean, if I was to add to that, this whole concept of data-driven operations is extremely critical, because G talked about closed loop automation, and ultimately that's the only way to get from reactive to proactive to predictive assurance, because you want to get to the point where you can actually predict certain future behaviors or actions based on what you're seeing, and there is just so much data coming through. So we work with a lot of our clients on how to actually generate insights on that huge amount of data that G was talking about, and do so as early as possible in the whole operational life cycle, because the sooner you detect, you're going to be able to get to the proactive and then ultimately predictive assurance, which is where we want to get to.
And we see that actually on the posture side as well. So if we see that, an enterprise is hasn't patched or is vulnerable because they haven't done a particular security piece of hygiene, then you can absolutely be proactive and say, look, now it's time to do this. You're at risk of these threats and whatnot.
Amal, where do you think the digital transformation is at this point of time? Has it started? Are we feeling the impact, or are we still waiting for it?
I think as ultimate end users, all of us as consumers, we may not immediately see that impact, but we are seeing it reflected in a couple of indirect ways, right? So the number one is the fact that there is a lot more choice. We are here today at MWC, and you've seen so many announcements on different, not just device ecosystem, but also some of the features and functionalities and so on. So there's a lot more choice, and that's only coming through because a lot of the clients are responding to the digital transformation and trying to change the way they work. Now, ultimately, all of us want to get to the point where you would have the positive effect of that in pricing, in choice, and in customer experience. Because I think the other impact we are seeing is a lot of the clients that we serve are changing their user experience, the UI, the interface through which they actually interact with the customers. That's very critical for us, because that's the only way you can touch and feel the digital transformation, in the sense customer experience is very different from what it was before. The choice you have is very different from what it was before, whether it's B2B or B2C, that the same paradigm applies. And I think that's where we are seeing the impact. I think it will still take time, because a lot of the providers and enterprises are working through the transformation from a cost perspective and then from a revenue perspective. So until they fully realize that transformation, we won't see the immediate benefit, but they are. And that's important for us as an ecosystem.
Yeah, I would just add that it will continually be a journey. You're not going to be before digital transformation and after digital transformation. And so you see certain pieces of the transformation already occurring. We mentioned cloud. Supply chain coupling is another one. And in fact, you've seen over the last 6 to 12 months, the supply chain certified vendors being attacked and then disrupting the supply chain from that perspective. So each stage of this is a journey, and each one poses its own issues that we have to address as an industry.
Well, I appreciate both of you being with us and sharing your insights, and you'll have to have both back along this journey.
The pleasure is mine.
Thank you, Clarence. Thank you very much.